Certainly is a challenge. It feels like galloping through a PhD thesis in 15 minutes. But I am very glad just to have this slot, because although we are facing tremendous adversity and great difficulties at the moment, the fact is in this country we have a very, very proud history. And I just wanted to remind us of that, because that provides a fantastic foundation and platform for what we need to do next. So, because there is such a lot, what I did was print out enough copies on 2 sides of A4 of the kinds of influences that historically have helped us in this country to develop one of the more interesting, enlightened and effective ways of helping young children to develop and learn. I don't know about you, but I'm very offended at the idea of readiness for school, and also children ready to learn when they go to school. That's even worse than being ready for school. It betrays such a misunderstanding, doesn't it, about child development. You will find on the front of the paper, and they're here on the stage, so I think when you get a chance, possibly at tea time, come and pick one up for yourself if you want. And I'll be here at tea time because I've also brought some of the documentation that has supported our work over the years. On the reverse side of the A4 page, there is a list. It is by no means comprehensive, of the influences which actually go back to Rousseau, in my mind, 1712. But actually Robert Owen in Scotland in 1812 put into practice some very enlightened ideas for early education for children from 1 to 6, the children of his workers in his mill. And so the list goes on. And although I've made myself a lot of notes, and if you want my notes, you're welcome to email me, and my email address is at the bottom of the page, you can also Google them and find out, can't you? So I have done some summaries, which there isn't room to put on this paper. I've also included more. There are names that perhaps aren't quite so well known, names from other countries that have influenced here, and some that are continuing to have influence. What I missed out, and I'm sorry about this really, are groups that have been working in this field for some time, and I think this group here is probably the latest and potentially the most powerful. So I do want to mention groups like the Earliest Curriculum Group that were battling away in the 90s, and before, and National Campaign for Real Nursery Education, who are still continuing to fight the good fight, taking into various fronts, including Ofsted. I haven't got time, that's not history, that's the future, so I'm not going to talk about that. But there is a list of influential reports, and it is very fascinating going back into our history to find that from 1908 onwards, there was an engagement with early years and the policy and the needs and the importance of meeting those needs. And I will go into a few details about 1 or 2 of those, but it's quite right to mention the 1994 Start Right report, which predated Sure Start, really, and all the things that came from them. On the list I've also put desirable outcomes for children's learning on entering primary education, which came out in 1996, and it was Mary Jane Drummond, I think, who labelled them immediately undesirable outcomes. But actually, I don't know about you, but I look back on those and think that they had something to recommend them, not least because they said that the outcomes should be aimed for and reached at the point, or measured at the point when children reach statutory school age. And that's very different from the early learning goals, which are at the end of the reception year. So in a way, it was a much fairer one, and they were much simpler. However, from that stage on, really, we've had floods and floods of advice and guidance from government, and perhaps that's rather suppressed our own thinking to some extent. And we've been diverted more into trying to make it child-friendly and user-friendly and try and translate and interpret it in a way that makes it helpful to children and families rather than damaging. So perhaps we're going to have a change now. Perhaps we're going to start to take up our shield and even more our swords and be warriors. Which is why I've called this Lest We Forget. And I do hope that people who have, as I do, have relatives who died in the wars that the cenotaph commemorates, but there is a phrase underneath Lest We Forget, which I think is very appropriate to us, and I think we are battling a very important fight. It honours our nation's veterans and strives to illuminate the past so that we may all brighten the future for our children. I offer it to you, and that's why I've called it Lest We Forget. One of the things that I think we need to remember are the statements that were coming up. This came out in 1990. Yes, I've written it up, that's good. And it's interesting and instructive to remember that Angela Rumbold was a Tory Education Secretary. And this report came out, and I think it's one of the most powerful and most effective and probably most economical statements about what does work in early years and what does constitute effective early years education. This is a very brief summary, but if you notice, early years means children up to 7 or 8. Yes, it does. And the Children Act of 1989 actually stated that. That was applying more to social services, if you remember. But it's very useful to have these very clear statements that came from government, and really at a fairly early stage when we were beginning to really lobby for expansion of early education. You'll see in my notes that actually, although there was a big battle through Margaret and Rachel Macmillan starting their nursery in Deptford in 1913, or the Edinburgh nurseries that started even a decade before that, it is the case that expansion has been slow. It's been supported by the Nursery School Association, as it then was, Margaret Macmillan, and actually some prime ministers were involved in it at that time. But although in wartime there was an expansion, it was very much to do with childcare, to release women to work. And it's helpful to remember that we were actually collaborating and bringing together childcare and education in the past, because that has been a point of discussion, hasn't it, lately, and is the care happening at the expense of the real interests of the children? So the fact that the nursery schools grew largely out of that in the war years isn't insignificant. But what is significant is that once women weren't needed to go out to work again, the numbers started to deteriorate. And regrettably, they are going down now significantly, and it's to do with all sorts of other issues, still connected with childcare, of course. And I think as a group, I hope very much as a group, and if we don't, I think we'll run into difficulty. We need to make sure that those two run in parallel, and that above all, the children's interests remain paramount. It's very difficult to see how family life and the future of society is going to thrive if our children are being put into situations which do not promote their best development. So here's the Rumbold report, which goes back. It did get... Are you waving at me? Right, let me just quickly go through. Yes, I see. Here's a statement from the British Association for Early Childhood Education, a very general one, and you'll find that on the notes. You don't need that. The other thing that I really must show you, and I will take my last minutes to talk to you about quality in diversity. This was a group representing all the organisations interested in early childhood care and education, came together through the Early Childhood Forum, and some of you here will remember that, and there was a lot of work that went over for the best part of 2 years around the country, led by Vicky Hurst, much missed. And this, because it came out just around the time that Sure Start began, it didn't really get the purchase that it deserves, but I do commend it to you because it is a very principled document, and at the time it was bought into by everybody who was involved in early years care and education, and I think it's a very good potential foundation for the way that we want to go forward. So maybe I just need to... Sorry? Have I? Oh, I see. Thank you. Right, well, just quality and diversity based on different kinds of things, not areas of learning exactly, but areas of development. And I did do another one. I wasn't sure whether you'd be able to see it, probably not, but it shows that there's a much more complexity within it about the adult role and how that all works together. So I will have that down here, and I'd be very happy to talk about it. Being involved in that was a huge professional experience for everybody, I think, who contributed. There was an enormous amount of debate and discussion, and it was a terrific achievement, I think, to get it out with a consensus that it has. And it's still there, and it is still in publication. You can get it on Amazon, actually, I'm glad to say. And I did want to underline that it is a collaborative venture. And it did look at children from 5 to 8 as well as from birth to 5. I think we need to remember that and make sure that we get the transition into Key Stage 1 right. And we certainly need early years teachers who can bridge that, who understand the pedagogy of working with young children, which is exactly the sort of stuff that our country has led on. And I think that's really what I want, This isn't irrelevant either. This is a proxy, the research, findings from research. I found a very early statement from Cathy Silver, not very long after she'd done the Oxford project, which she came over here to lead. So that EPI came later, and there's all that information that we've got. But based on her findings, which was a review of High Scope, actually, this is the statement that's been there. So we have known this for a very long time, and governments have known it for a very long time, and how disgraceful that they're so selective in what they take from research, even research they commission themselves. So I've finished with a picture of children, which actually came from the Early Foundation Stage original booklet. I need to credit them, although actually the picture came from BASE in the first instance. They stole it. But I do want to commend to all of us and remind us that there are principles that underpin this version of the Earliest Foundation Stage that we're working with now, because I don't think we can quibble too much with the principles. It's a question of how they're interpreted and the ways in which we equip people to be able to do that in a way that makes sense. And of course, it needs to link with parents. They need to understand. We need to be able to celebrate and publicise and explain with more rigour than perhaps we've done in the past how we can make these principles work in practice for our children. Every child is a unique child, constantly learning, can be resilient, capable, confident and self-assured. I mean, actually, in a way, what more do we need? Children learn to be strong and independent through positive relationships. Children learn and develop well in enabling environments in which their experiences respond to their individual needs, and there's a strong partnership between practitioners and parents or carers. And children develop and learn in different ways and at different rates. This is not news. One is left really gasping. And I am particularly saddened because other countries in the 60s and 70s came here to have a look at our very enlightened and effective and powerful and child-centred educational practice. And on my paper you'll see notes about that. And we've been asked, I've personally worked through the British Council and also through UNICEF in other countries who come here because they are so impressed, excited and envious of what we have done over the years. So I think we need to remember that. Let us remember that, and let us stand very proud and make sure that we remind our politicians, who are perhaps a bit too young to have that length of memory that I have.
We do have a little extra time at the moment because, unfortunately, there's another bit of film we're unable to show. So if there is a question, I think we could take another few minutes to answer it, because Wendy is such a fount of knowledge about what has happened in early years. Questions or statements? Anybody want to add to? I'm sorry, it's terribly difficult, isn't it? We're sitting out here to what's been said this afternoon so far. How can we be empowered to remind politicians?
Have you got? No.
Yes,
no, I'm sorry. That's very flippant, and I don't know what I would do.
Come closer.
I really don't know what I would do if I were teaching now or ahead, and I'm thankful that I don't have to face the dilemmas. But I am really amazed at how much we've done, perhaps particularly in the early years. Maybe it's something to do with the fact that we are responsive and we really try and make sense of the world to our children. And maybe we've done too much interpreting and trying to mediate the things that have been expected of us. But I'm particularly offended by what Ofsted, the enforcer, is now doing. It seems to me to be very difficult, and I'm very glad that the NCR&E are going to confront Ofsted, and some of us need to do that. And I know there's somebody in this room who stood up and told Liz Truss where to get off very recently. I'm expecting to encounter her, but she has got a habit of not coming to meetings, hasn't she? We do need to be brave, really. There is a risk, but I think it's gone past the stage now where we can afford to go on agreeing. I've done that too, and there are people who think I've gone too far in working with government. My view is that if you don't retain an open conversation, then you've no hope of influencing things. So I'll probably try and go on doing that, but without very much hope. And I think really we need to make our voices heard, and we need to link with parents and make sure that those who already agree become more vocal because they're voters, and those who don't yet understand or who are being made very anxious by the kinds of standards, the expected standards, that's so offensive too. You know, expected standards that you can expect. a third of the children are not going to be able to meet because they're younger, not because they're stupid. It's really very, very unsatisfactory at the moment, and I think we need to give them notice that we don't approve.
Did you want to just add to that? There is a mic coming, and if you could just respond.
I just wanted to use the concept of the word untrust and trust.
Trust up. Yeah. Untrustworthy. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I did hear a rumour she's going to stop whatever free milk is still available, so she gets known as Thatcher the Second.
She's what?
Get known as Thatcher the Second by cutting whatever milk may still be available. No, sorry, that's off the record. Does she say that? Oh, I must start reading blogs. Yeah. So it's true. Well, she got the looks. And the blue suit. No, well, I'm sorry, I really shouldn't be flippant because, I think I've been around for so long, you must know that I take it very seriously indeed, otherwise I'd go and plant my garden. I'd rather do other sort of